So here we are at the epilogues. 1. 12 hours later. 1,700 people dead. Roughly 800 in the Bradburn camp, 650 in the Renetta camp, 200 aides and staff from the other 13, and close to 50 civilians. Another 1,200 wounded, nearly half of which were in critical condition. Thanks to the combined foresight of Renetta and Tolson, medics had arrived on the scene minutes after Bradburn's death. Not just one or two ambulances, but enough medical professionals it seemed like the whole hospital had arrived. By some miracle, and in direct defiance of the heavy losses, the core crew had survived. Moira, Renetta, Naira, Elaine, and Naomi all volunteered to help the medics, working through the remainder of the night and well past sunrise. Rolf eventually turned up, more embarrassed than truly hurt, and made his own contributions to the stadium's dire medical needs. Tigra was part of the third batch of people carted off to the hospital, as his condition was serious, but not life-threatening. If Sergei hadn't been there, they'd have needed a half-dozen men just to load Tigra into the back of the ambulance. As it was, Sergei only needed help from 2. Then there was Leo, Tolson, and Melissa herself. Leo threatened to shoot any medic who tried to take him to the hospital for treating his internal injuries. His holster was plainly visible and clearly empty, but the growl in his voice and the flashing of his fangs was convincing enough that no one went against his wishes. Tolson had volunteered to start the long, arduous process of IDing bodies, taking several dozen officers with him, and working inside the stadium long after the rain had shut off at the start of the first Sunday. Melissa counted herself lucky. Even among the crew, most had suffered at least one or more severe injuries. She'd had a couple close calls, but ultimately been spared. In so doing, Elaine had been kept in perfect condition, something Naira had thanked her for profusely. Out of the 143 officers that had answered Tolson's call to action, 56 had died. Good men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice. Officer Trilby had died rescuing a political aide from an anima spawn. Officer Williams had died providing cover that ultimately saved the lives of 4 fellow officers. And on down the list. The tales of heroism were continuing to pour in with every officer she checked on. Then there were the actions of Renetta's people. They'd put their lives on the line, going above and beyond to defend the civilians. This was most evident in Marston's squads. Together, they'd protected the concert, a mixed crowd of almost 1,000 people from not one, but 2 separate attempts to spread murder, carnage, and mayhem. There were a number of wounded among the concert-goers, but not a single one had died. The losses among Marston's men numbered close to 50, but they'd taken down twice that number and arrested another 300. Again, nothing short of a miracle. Now, the dust had all but settled on the darkest night in Cyphus' history. While most everyone continued to work on scene at the stadium, Tolson had called Melissa over to the central spire. Tazale's explosives had made quite a mess of the power plant, but it wasn't the surface that interested Tolson. Indeed, as Melissa pulled up, he led her to a descending staircase, and the concrete rubble was soon replaced by a metallic rat maze. I'm telling you, Melissa, it's like something out of one of your comic books. I swear, you're gonna geek out of your mind. She rolled her eyes. I feel like you're overselling this, Tolson. We've all had a long night. There's no way that... The hallway widened, culminating in something close in size to a garage door. Beyond it was an enormous room filled almost floor to ceiling with video screens. Her breath escaped her in a gasp. The only place she'd ever seen them was in comics and history books. These were illegal in the bulbs, and for good reason. Using them had a nasty habit of attracting the ire of Phanatom's local megafauna. No one had ever quite figured out why. It was no exaggeration to say that there were hundreds of screens in here. Admittedly, most of them weren't powered up, no doubt thanks to Tazale's explosive sabotage, but a few were running on a backup power system. How long have these been down here? She asked, not really expecting an answer. Tolson shrugged. Best we can tell, they came with the bulb. There was a lot of stuff piled in front of the door, and it took us a couple hours to clear a path. I'm not sure the Spire workers even knew it was down here. Our best guess is that the door opened when Tazale killed the power. Some kind of safety measure or something. Maybe so people wouldn't get trapped inside. It's been centuries since the last recorded wildlife attack on the bulb. Has this been running that whole time? Seems like it. It's incredible, Melissa breathed, walking behind a row of chairs set opposite a row of dormant screens. She found one that wasn't dormant, light illuminating her fur as she pressed her fingers reverently to the glass. So, buried in a bunker like this, they don't draw any attention? Tolson shrugged. I don't see any giant holes from something digging its way in here to find it. Not gonna lie, Tolson. I didn't think this would live up to your hype. But boy, did you deliver. He grinned. You haven't even seen the best part yet. With a wave of his hand, he gestured for her to follow. Her hand left a print in the dust as she reluctantly stepped away. Tolson led her towards the center of the room, where a large circular platform held a ring-shaped console with about a dozen stations. Each station had a chair, a monitor, and a keyboard, like you'd find on a typewriter. Again, she'd read about computers, but being in a room full of them was blowing her mind. All of these monitors were glowing brightly, showing some kind of readout and data stream on something rather circular in shape. She squinted at the one Tolson pointed out to her, and there was a grid laid out in the circle, a series of perpendicular, interconnected lines that looked incredibly familiar. Letters above the circle read, Seed C5. This is Cyphus. Tolson grinned. Yep. His finger circled a small red hex in the center of the map. Pretty sure this is where Naira's boy punched a hole in the roof. Now look at this one. Melissa followed him to the next computer. This one had a long readout taking up over half the screen. One of the boys played around with it a bit and found a built-in way to change the display language. Turns out, these computers can display in SNP. Melissa raised an eyebrow. One of the boys? Tolson's grin widened as he thumbed it himself. This boy, if you want to get specific. Rolling her eyes, Melissa said, You really can't stop yourself from touching things, can you? Less ignoring my genius and more taking advantage of the fruits of my labors, please. Read it. She did. Warning. Hull breach detected in hex C5DH321. Emergency self-repair module is unresponsive. Technician has been notified. Position in queue, 2. Technician? What technician? Tolson's grin only widened. Your head is gonna explode, Liz. Then he pointed to another pair of computers. Feeling like a deerhound being led by the nose, Melissa sighed, her curiosity overcoming her exhaustion and pushing her to the next station. This one was a map of a different bulb, Seed F4. There's one of these for every bulb? She asked. Tolson nodded. E1, D2, K3, F4, C5, G6. He began counting off on his fingers. Erastil, Dakota, Codagen, Fanina, Cyphus, Genthis. It's all 6 of them. That made this station a map of Fanina. The computer beside it showed another warning declaring a similar message about a hull breach and dispatched technician. However, it wasn't the fact that it was number 1 in the queue that caught her attention, nor the fact that the technician's location and estimated time to repair completion were both unknown. It was the picture being displayed of the technician that made her jaw drop. Man, I'm so glad I was here to see your face when you saw your first real alien. Seriously, Melissa, I think you might actually be drooling. The woman in the photo had skin the color of blueberries. A pair of sharp horns, ornamented with golden rings, protruded from the top of her head, curling towards each other, though staying at least a handbreadth apart at the tips. Dark hair spilled down over rounded ears that clung to the sides of her head. The hair disappeared behind her shoulders, yet there wasn't a strand of fur anywhere to be seen on her. Her eyes were the same piercing gold as her jewelry. She had a nose, but it was a small yet prominent triangular thing, plastered above a flat mouth on the front of an otherwise relatively flat face. The head was shaped almost like a white crest egg, with the point facing down. Odd as she looked to Melissa's eyes, she had to admit the woman was pretty, in her own weirdly furless way. I'm waiting for you to spot it. Spot what? Tolson said nothing, doing a terrible job of keeping his grin from leaping off his face. The woman wore something almost like a jumpsuit. Maybe even a historical flight suit? There were numbers printed on it, and a name tag. Melissa froze. There, in bold letters, the name tag proclaimed, Anima. Melissa's voice escaped in a whisper. Oh, what the... Tolson's grin exploded. Meet the devil herself! Then he broke out into a laugh. Screens like the things you put in windows to keep bugs out? Or screens like the ancient things you don't even talk about with your friends, or the boogeyman will come running out of the woods to eat you? Leo asked. The latter, Melissa said. Stop spoiling the surprise. Leo could hear Tolson's indignant voice in the background. I didn't spoil it for you. Melissa must have cupped the handset, because the phone in Leo's hands went quiet for several long seconds. Finally, she came back on. Point is, you should come see this. Leo let out an exhausted sigh. All right, I'll grab a car and meet you there. His stomach growled like a predator, interrupting his next thought and reminding him that he hadn't eaten a proper meal in over 14 hours. I'm assuming you guys are starving, because I'm certainly starving, and I typically eat less than both of you. Rude, Melissa cut in. In the background, Leo heard Tolson ask, What'd he say? So, once we wrap up here, what say we all get food? Leo asked. Again, silence echoed from the receiver as Melissa cupped her end once more. When she finally came back on the phone, Leo heard Tolson saying, Ask if he wants to go to Benji's diner. Melissa sighed like an exasperated parent. He'll be shocked and surprised to hear that Tolson wants Benji's. Works for me, Leo said, his stomach growling more now that it had actually gotten his attention. You'd also wanted coffee? The line went silent, save for Melissa's breathing. He was about to apologize when Melissa spoke. Yeah, I could go for a coffee afterwards. They have coffee at Benji's, Tolson called out in the background. Melissa growled before snapping, I know they have coffee at Benji's. We get it. We're going already. You don't need to keep suggesting it. It was a loud enough outburst, Leo had to physically distance the phone's receiver from his ear. He heard a weary sigh. Please, get over here quickly, Leo, before I add another murder to the report. 10-4, Chief. More silence. Tolson told you? Tolson told me. She growled again. And I must strangle that man with his own loose tongue. Sounds like you're gonna beat her to it. Sorry, force of habit. Just get down here, please. Leo grinned. Despite the horrors and exhaustion of the previous night, along with the fact that it was now morning, the literal worst part of the day, Leo found himself happier than he'd been in forever. For the first time in a long time, he found himself looking forward to what the future would bring. I'll be right over. Two. 4 months after the breach. I think this is the first of my political functions that you've willingly attended in, well, ever, honestly. Who are you, and what have you done with my daughter? Moira rolled her eyes, a laugh escaping before she had the chance to stifle it. As if I'd miss my mother being installed as the grand tyrant of Cyphus. Her mother shot her a flat look as she straightened her tie and smoothed out her lapel. Dear, it's called the Prime Minister. It's the same political structure that the Genthis bulb uses. Tigra's been telling me all about it and giving me loads of inspiration. Turns out there's quite a political theorist brain hiding out beneath all his bulk and fuzz. I suppose spending years in a solitary cell provides plenty of time for thought and reflection. You're taking previously subdivided power and grouping it all under one person. I'm pretty sure that definitionally, you're becoming a tyrant. Renetta shook her head, turning away from the mirror to regard her daughter. I'll be whatever Cyphus needs right now. If it's going to take a tyrant to get it back on its feet, then that's what I shall be. That said, Prime Minister leaves a much better taste in the mouth than Grand Tyrant. Besides, I'm not taking all the power. There's going to be a cabinet under me, probably an elected parliament too, though I think I want to come up with better names for both, so Genthis doesn't sue us for theft of intellectual property. There will be plenty of people to share the power. Oh? Moira asked with a knowing grin. And when do they start? Next year, so there's no opposition to my new labor and equal opportunity laws. There's certain measures I want to have in place before checks and balances come in to screw everything up. I'm going to milk these emergency powers for everything they're worth. Yep, tyrant. Oh, hush, dear. One of the staff might hear you and leak it to the papers. Oh, you'd be absolutely ruined, Moira said in an over-exaggerated version of her mother's accent. Her mother sighed, then offered a small smile. For what it's worth, it means the world to me that you're here tonight. Of course. Even if you look like you just swam here through buckets of fresh paint. Mom! Your hair looks nice, though. Moira rolled her eyes again. You insisted on styling it. I had to do something to save that jacket. I happen to like this jacket. Her mother offered a thin smile. It is the most informal piece of clothing I've ever beheld. You do realize that standing with Naomi and Rolf will leave you on stage, where the whole crowd will see you standing out like a living rainbow? If I'm going to start attending your political stuff, then I'm going to wear what I want. It's that simple. Renetta looked her up and down with a disapproving eye. With a raised eyebrow, she said, Very well. I'll not argue the point further, though I'm convinced you get your sense of fashion from your father. Too bad for you, I inherited your stubbornness. Indeed, Renetta mused. Then she smiled and drew Moira into a hug. Don't ever compromise who you are, my dear, even for me. Wouldn't dream of it. The door to the dressing room creaked open, and Rolf peeked his head in. Prime Madam D? They're asking if you're ready to go on stage. Prime Minister, Rolf, her mother corrected. Oh, sorry. Prime Minister, Madam D. Her face scrunched up, and she came within a breath of saying something that was probably unkind. Instead, she simply gave a long exhale and a nod. I'll be right there. Leo found Melissa seated at her desk, feet propped on the wooden surface as Renetta Dolahan's voice crackled over the radio. Listening to her acceptance speech? He asked, nervously tapping the envelope in his hand against his leg. Melissa nodded, glancing up with a smile. New Prime Minister's got quite some ambitious overhauls in store for all of us. I hope Cyphus finds the energy to keep up with her. You're rather late. Get hung up on some paperwork or something? Yeah, something like that, Leo said, his fingers creasing the paper in his grasp. The first coffee date had gone pretty well. So had the second. After the third time, it became a weekly thing. Just last month, it had become twice a week. Vanina, she was giving him a reason to look forward to mornings, a time of day he'd previously thought was devoid of any merit. Leo really didn't want to jeopardize that, and he knew that what he was about to say was going to upset her and excite her. It was just a question of which reaction was going to be stronger. He trusted her, though, and more importantly, he owed her this. He swallowed the lump in his throat, though it didn't really help it go away. I've got good news and bad news to share. Melissa's smile wilted into uncertainty. Reaching over, she dialed down the volume on the radio. When she turned back to Leo, she looked like she was preparing to get slapped, as if he needed to feel any guiltier about this. Got a preference where I start? He asked. Melissa rested her hands on her knees, tapping her fingers restlessly. Her eyes bored through him while she considered. Well, I'm already sitting down. Might as well lead with the bad news. Okay, then. Hopefully that would get her rage out of the way quickly. Gulping again, Leo nodded. All right. I'm resigning from the force. Not just stepping down as chief, but leaving Precinct 3 behind altogether. Melissa's eyes widened, and she looked at him as if he had actually slapped her. What? Why? Because of your mom? He grimaced. It's not a money thing. Then what is it? His thumb scratched figure eights in his hip, a replacement fidget to combat the old cravings. He hadn't touched a necrol stick in 2 months, and he would fight to keep that number growing. The people at the precinct give me way too much slack. I'm only doing a passable job because you're handling a lot of the paperwork side, and Tolson's handling most of the HR stuff. I'm really not built for this kind of work, and the longer I do it, the more I feel the stress building. I've lost a couple clumps of fur from my tail already. I feel old, but I'm too young for that dross to be starting. So I'm quitting to find something more suitable. Melissa's finger tapping increased in speed. Such as? Don't know yet. Wanted to take a break and use the time to think it through. Honestly, though, working security detail wasn't a bad gig. Rolf's already working full-time for the new Prime Minister, and it'd be nice to work a job where I'm not likely to shoot someone more than once or twice every few years. Just one thought I had, though. So you're just going to leave me and Tolson in the lurch? Leo shook his head quickly. Absolutely not. I'll stay until the new chief is installed. Melissa let out her breath in a slow hiss. Gotta be honest, Leo. I've kept tabs on the current waiting list for people to be promoted to chief, and they're all going to be 100 times worse to work for than you. So you better have one fanina of a candidate in mind. She narrowed her gaze. Wait, are you promoting Tolson? No, Leo said, his claws accidentally tearing into the envelope. You've brought me to the good news, though. This is for you. He held out the envelope, which Melissa eyed with suspicion. Gingerly, she took it, raising an eyebrow at its partly crumpled and torn condition. She slit the top with a thumb claw and grimaced. How long were you holding this? The top's a bit soggy. Sorry. Removing the letter, Melissa started to read. Her eyes widened to saucers as she reached the second paragraph. She read through the letter once, turning it over to check the back, then read through it again without saying a word. Then she read through it a third time. Leo? She said in a low, dangerous voice. Is this real? Because if this is a prank, I swear to Seed Mother, I'll shred this letter, soak it in toilet water, and make you drink it. Lovely woman, he liked. Granted, her suspicion of him was justified, based on everything he'd put her through in the past. Clearing his throat, he said, It's very real. The letter crinkled in her hand, her claws leaking out to poke small holes in the notarized document. The record's been expunged, he said. You've officially been given a clean slate. To say Melissa was stunned was an understatement. She trembled, staring at the page like it told her a close relative had just died. Red stuck into her eyes. True to her calling as a detective, understanding dawned on her a few moments later. That's why you're stepping down. Leo grimaced, then forced a smile as he shrugged. Part of the deal. It's cleaner for transitioning anyway. Looks better on the books. Honestly, I'll sleep better knowing there's someone competent looking after the precinct. Since you're clean now, I'm putting you forward as my recommendation for replacement chief. Leo, you... Tears started to spill over, each one a tiny knife stabbing Leo with a fresh pang of guilt. He didn't just like this woman. He loved this woman, and he hated how easily he made her cry. Getting to her feet, she clutched the letter to her chest. Big drops splashed on the tiles as she stared down at the floor. Her whole body shook. So rage was winning. That was fine. Leo deserved a beating. There wasn't a hint of anger in her eyes as she looked up to meet his gaze. Something mesmerizing shone past the sea of tears, and her smile quieted every last doubt and fear in Leo's mind. You terrible man, and beautiful, wonderful friend. Still clutching the letter in her hand, she closed the distance between them, resting her head against his shoulder as she squeezed him with a hug so fierce even Tigra might pass out. Yeah, scary as it was, and as much work as it had taken to pull it off, Leo had done the right thing. Relief coursed through him, and he returned the hug. Over 500,000 cases of prism sickness in 4 months. Thank the Seed Mother, there were less than 80 deaths as the direct result of exposure to pure prism, though there were quite a few ramifications beyond risk of death. Those closest to the breach had the highest rate of exposure. That was no surprise, as the particulates in pure prism made it denser than Siphus's traditionally filtered air. Prism did diffuse with time, but it was a very slow process. Siphus's filtration systems relied on recirculation, and many of the more stringent filters were overstressed to the point of failure. Moira's efforts to plug the hole with a Tarim patch, while demonstrating quick thinking and bravery, only lasted for a few days. With no water or soil to sustain them, the vines withered away under Fanatom's sun. Since the hole was at the apex of the dome, some thousands of feet in the air, there had been no further attempt to reach and patch the hole. Extensive studies were carried out as prism sickness spread. Typical symptoms included severe migraines, persistent sensory overload, labored breathing, coughing, insomnia, and fatigue. These symptoms tended to last for 2 weeks before seeing any improvement, though there were a small number of cases where symptoms lasted for several months. Among those whose bodies were used to compressed prism, the symptoms lasted less than a week. Many of those affected were unable to work, and Siphus's health crisis turned into an economic one as well. Renetta used her position, and her connections, to inject money into the system, in a desperate bid to keep things in Siphus from collapsing any further. It was a small Curum crystal applied to a large wound. It helped, but the only real recovery would happen once people were over their symptoms enough to return to their normal lives. And what was a normal life supposed to look like in Siphus anymore? The prism had only just started encroaching on the edges of the bulb, but almost everyone you passed these days had at least a little bit of prismatic glow. Very few knew what to do about it. They simply understood that if you had it, and weren't too dizzy or overwhelmed to move, then you were supposed to get back to your life. Of course, Renetta had orchestrated a Truth About Prism radio campaign, in which Naira and several prestigious doctors were asked to discuss the effects of prism on the body and to ease people's fears. It was mostly true. Again, the goal was less to educate and more to simply reduce panic. Naira didn't bother explaining how prism connected one to magic, as the last thing the bulb needed right now was for hundreds of thousands of untrained alchemists to injure or kill themselves through unsafe usage of Fyrum, Electrum, Aquam, or Aurum. Still, she hoped that one day, alchemy would become a subject taught in every school in Siphus. Science should not be kept from anyone. Naira's teaching job had been put on the back burner for a while. As much of a constant flurry of preparation as that had been, her radio appearances were even more demanding. She and the doctors met every few days to go over new data, analyze trends, field concerns, and discuss their strategy. They needed to present a united front. Even a bit of disagreement among the experts would lead to suspicion and the return of panic. It was exhausting. Naira had never been so sick of people. So she was glad that Renetta was loaning her a hoverbike. Driving herself from meeting to meeting gave her a chance to breathe and to recover small doses of sanity. It especially left her the option to take detours or scenic routes when she needed extra alone time to cope. Renetta had tried to gift her the bike, but Naira wanted to earn it. She'd accept the bike as payment once her part in this prism sickness disaster was over. Of course, it wasn't just pride that drove her decision to be involved. Siphus had a prism sickness problem at all because her own flesh and blood had decided to punch a hole in the bulb. Millions of lives at risk because her son wanted to shake up the system. It was a Salatra-style solution, one with a cost so high and risks so unquantified, Tazale should never have even considered it. But he not only considered it, he'd carried it out. And that meant consequences for everyone. Tazale would spend the next 25 years of his life in a combination of jail time and extensive community service. And Siphus would spend the rest of its existence with only partial shielding from the outside world. Honestly, Tazale was getting off easy for everything he'd done. He'd admitted to murdering at least 6 separate Sneppards since being taken captive by Bradburn, and he'd risked millions of lives by breaching the bulb. If the casualty rate from prism sickness had been any higher, Tazale's sentence might have been for life. He had no idea how close he'd come to throwing his entire life away in his zeal. If the consequences for Tazale were akin to a slap on the wrist, then the consequences for Naira were like a spritz of water to the face and a gentle scolding. She had just as many deaths on her hand as her son did, plus a few more. With the exception of those she'd killed in the stadium, and the poor guard she'd shot too close to the heart while going after the Minister of Commerce, all her victims were members of the 13. The only reason she was still free to walk the streets of Siphus was because she had both the police chief of District 3 and the new Prime Minister defending her actions as being coerced by Bradburn, and insisting that her crimes be charged on Bradburn's account. Naira wasn't fully pleased with that. Having Elaine back and the ability to visit Tazale on weekends, guilt was creeping in. She'd killed to have them back. And now that she had them, she couldn't quite scrub the blood out of the pads on her fingers. She never lost sleep over what she'd done, but that didn't mean each day passed peacefully with nothing but joy and sunshine. Still, her family was alive and honestly well. Her home was undergoing repairs, something that Renetta again spun as payment to further guilt Naira into cooperating with this radio report scheme. Despite so much rapid change and such a deep wound, Siphus was still in one piece. Perhaps it was even healing. Only time would tell. 3. 10 months after the breach. Is everything all right, Miss Moira? Moira blinked, watching unfamiliar buildings zoom past the car window. A glance at a passing address told her that they were traveling through District 5. How long had she been sulking? Flashing a smile for Sergei's sake, she pulled her head away from the window and met his gaze through his rearview mirror. Yeah, I'm good. Sorry, it's just been a long week. He nodded. You are certainly quite busy these days. Between attending school most of the day, spending the afternoons as an unpaid physical therapist, and your evenings studying alchemy, I have to wonder when you're finding time to sleep. With an involuntary smirk, she glanced out the opposite window in time to see a Nulf and a Sneppard sharing a bus stop without any kind of awkward gap between them. In fact, with the brief glimpse she had, they seemed to be conversing. Still a rare sight in Siphus, though it was an encouraging one. There's more important stuff in my life right now than sleeping. Perhaps. Though you will be unable to help others and put the things you're learning into practice if you're dozing off at random parts of the day. That's what Prism's for. A steady stream keeps me alert all day. He shot her a raised eyebrow and skeptical look through his mirror. Does Miss Naira approve of that kind of practice? It does not sound safe in the long term. It's perfectly safe. Seed, Mother Sergei, you're such a worrywart. I know what I'm doing. The silence that followed was so abrupt that she was immediately bulldozed by guilt. I'm sorry, Sergei, that was incredibly uncalled for. Maybe I am a little tired. You have had a rather awful scowl since the phone call ended. Is there some bad news I should be aware of? The real reason for her mood leapt to the forefront of her mind. Naomi's busy today, so she canceled on me. I haven't seen her in 2 weeks, so I was really looking forward to hanging out today. She said her and Rolf had a thing to get ready for, so we rescheduled for next week. Just part of life. She said this more for her own sake than Sergei's. It was frustrating how much a simple thing like this was pulling down her mood when it had no right to. Naomi was well within her rights to hang out when and how she chose. Her life was her own. The timing just sucked. I see, Sergei said as he waited to turn the corner. Does she know what day tomorrow is? Moira let out a soft snort. No, I didn't want to guilt her or make her feel obligated to spend time with me. I can share her with other people in the bulb. There's other things I can do to celebrate my birthday besides having a sleepover. Like eating a slice of cake alone in the bathroom while I cry myself to sleep because I'm so exhausted. He shot her another glance, looking genuinely concerned, so she flashed another smile. Kidding, Sergei. Really, I'm fine. Like you pointed out, I'm just tired. People have missed my birthday before. It happens, and I'm not going to worry about it. I'll see them later and have just as good a time, if not better, than for some stupid birthday. It's not a stupid birthday. It's your birthday. Not until tomorrow, and I'm pretty sure you're the only one who feels like it's a big deal at this point. Was all he said in response as he merged into the next thoroughfare. Great. So her inability to be an adult and police her own mood had killed the conversation. That wouldn't do either. Sergei? Yes, Miss Moira. Would you mind making a quick stop? Your desire sets my destination. Where would you like to go? I think we could both use some ice cream. What do you say? My treat. As she watched, his face went through quite the array of emotions, looking almost guilty as he said a little too late, If you like, then of course, though I would be happy to treat you. My birthday's not until tomorrow, and I called it first, so I'll do the treating. Her gaze narrowed. Since when do you not want ice cream? Do you have somewhere to be? I never said that, Miss Moira, Sergei said, quickly adding, My apologies. I was simply caught off guard. It sounds like an excellent suggestion. Unfastening her seatbelt, Moira pulled herself to the open window, separating the two halves of her car. Sergei, do you have a date tonight? Her driver let out a laugh, a nervous one, before denying the suggestion. No, I do have plans tonight, but nothing of that nature. She continued to eye him with suspicion. He was hiding something. He even looked guilty? Though about what, she couldn't imagine. Sergei was basically a giant fluffy angel. She pressed him with a few other questions, but received only boring responses. Finally giving up, she returned to her seat and rebuckled at his request. Sergei never kept secrets from her. Something was up, and she was going to get to the bottom of it. But first, she was going to indulge in 3 fresh scoops and hope that the brain freeze drowned out the creeping tendrils of loneliness. Yeah, she might have to spend tonight alone after all, but she could have a good day before and after that, and that was just what she was going to do. Surprise! Moira shut the door to the living room almost as quickly as she had opened it. That couldn't stop the resultant wave of laughter from squeezing through every gap between door and frame. She'd only had a glance, but she'd seen Naomi and Rolf inflating balloons together. Naira had been standing to the side beside an enormous cake. Most importantly, Mom's in there, Moira hissed at the now grinning Sergei. Straightening up, Sergei tugged idly at his shirt cuffs. Suits weren't traditional Nolfin attire, but seed mother. He would certainly always rock them. What? He asked as he checked his tie and collar. Did you think after last year's debacle I was going to let your mother find an excuse? Despite her genuine fatigue and the fading buzz of the fight-or-flight response caused by the combination of excellent hearing colliding with a wall of shouting, Moira conjured a smile. So that's why you were acting all weird in the car. Thumbing at the door, she asked, This is your doing, then? Rolling his neck to even out his collar, he inclined his head in a small bow. I may have played a small part in what is about to transpire. Be honest with me. Did Mom forget again? There was no hint of dodginess in his expression as he shook his head. No. In fact, she's the one who came to me with the idea well over a month ago. I know that for a time, her desire to secure a future for this household caused her to make foolish and unnecessary sacrifices. However, today and tomorrow, all sacrifices are made in your honor. After all, you're only turning 17 once, so it should be suitably memorable. Mom had remembered. It shouldn't have really been surprising. Their relationship had drastically improved in the aftermath of the decimation of the 13. It seemed almost a contradiction, considering that both of them were busier in their respective lives than ever before. And yet, both of them had been putting significant effort into making time for each other. Somehow, that had started to fill the last hole in Moira's heart. For the first time in a long time, Moira finally realized that she was truly seen and truly loved. And it was in no small part due to the one who'd never lost sight of her in the first place. For many years, Moira had viewed Sergei as a full-time babysitter, but time had helped her see him as so much more. He wasn't her dad, nor could he fill that void perfectly, but his attentiveness and care were above and beyond anything she could have asked for from someone in his position. He was her driver, her butler, her confidant, her shoulder to cry on, her life counselor, her biggest supporter, and the friend who had stuck by her side when everything in her life had begun falling apart. This compassionate, attentive, wonderful Nolf. She owed him more than she could ever repay. Her entire life he'd fought for her. Going forward, Moira would never content herself with doing anything less for him. So she hugged him. A simple, unspoken gesture that did little to help stem the water building up around her eyes. Sergei, you're the best. His hand came down to rest against her shoulder, giving her a gentle squeeze. And it is only because you've daily inspired me to be so, Miss Moira. A half-choked chuckle broke from Moira's lips. Nina, Sergei. I know that Mom pays you to be annoyingly respectful, but just take the compliment for once. You think me worthy of such praise from the most talented Alchemancer in all the bulb? I wouldn't be that person today if it wasn't for you. Thank you. She felt him take a breath to protest, but he wisely let it go. Instead, he simply said, It has been my honor to walk beside you and see you grow into the young woman standing here today. You far exceeded all hopes I've ever held for you. Most of all, it thrills me to see you finally finding the happiness you've always deserved. Well, Brack, how was she supposed to follow that up? Admit that she doubted herself almost the entire way? Confess that she'd assumed that her happiness had died with her father? And spoil the moment and the warmth that now filled her chest? No, not for anything. Thank you, she muttered, her face leaving a few gray strands and wet streaks on his otherwise immaculate white shirt. The pleasure continues to be mine, Miss Moira. Sniffling, Moira wiped an arm across her snout as she finally let him go. A moment later, Sergei held out a perfectly pressed handkerchief for her, which she took to make him happy. When she had finished cleaning her face, she looked up at him, and he met her gaze with a smile. Do you intend to keep them waiting until it actually becomes your birthday? With a quick wink, he gestured gently at the door. No amount of shaking her head could dislodge the smile from her face. Even if it was just for this moment in time, the loneliness she'd grown so used to was nowhere to be found. Beyond that door were people that saw her, knew her, and cared about her. And Sergei was right. It was rude to keep them waiting. So she opened the door once more, determined to make this a birthday to remember. 4. 1 year after the breach. Rolf gave Leo a shove. All the way to the end, man. We need all the space we can get. I mean, Tigra's gonna take up 2 chairs just by himself. Leo grinned, repaying the shove with a friendly punch to the kit's shoulder. He had to aim up a bit now. Rolf's final growth spurt had left him at 6.5 feet, though his fluff-filled ears pushed that to almost 7 feet at the tips. Spot on the ends from Melissa, but she's picking up Tizeo, so she's going to be at least 30 minutes late. Relax, Rolf. I reserved the whole row. You know, Moira called from down the line. Mom offered to get us box seating. We could have had catering and everything. Oh, I'm aware, Leo said. But this thing was my idea, so it's my treat. Besides, you're so far removed from the action in those box seats, you might as well just listen to the radio broadcast of the game. If you're going to experience baseball, it's got to be from the trenches of the bleachers. Moira folded her arms, giving him a dissatisfied look. These aren't bleachers. Schools use bleachers. This is stadium seating. Hard, plastic stadium seating. They aren't even padded. Reaching out, Leo gave her baseball cap a quick smack on the bill, knocking it down over her eyes. Seed Mother gave you your own natural padding. You'll be fine. Sandwiched between Moira and Rolf as the whole pack found their seating, Naomi reached out to give Moira a playful elbow to the ribs. If your rump gets sore afterwards, your mother's private masseur is good at dealing with that. Really knows how to relieve the tension. Moira pointed an indignant finger up at her friend's face. You're gross. The finger swiveled to Leo. You're too used to being poor. The finger shifted to Rolf. You're spilling beer down the inside of your jacket. Stiffening, Rolf glanced down before uttering a quick curse and using his hand to brush at the incriminating liquid trail. Seed Mother, Rolf, you're still underage, Leo said, suppressing his smirk and forcing a serious expression. You have any idea what Melissa's gonna do if she catches you with that? I'm like 6 months away. Besides, the guy didn't even card me. They never card Nolfs because you guys don't carry driver's licenses. Yet, Moira and Naomi said in unison. Jinxing each other, they burst into giggles as they sat down, arguing over who'd gotten it out first. Rolf looked at Leo with uncertainty. Melissa wouldn't arrest me, right? Leo shrugged. She might. She's a stricter chief than I ever was. Your best bet, he continued with mock solemnity, is to drain it. Hide the evidence before she gets here. Eyes widening, Rolf nodded. Yeah, I guess you're right. His hand disappeared into his jacket and came back out with an open 40. Now it was Leo's turn to gawk. Rolf started to chug when Naomi slapped him. You said you were going to share, Dip. What the fanine are you doing? Leo said I should chug it so his girlfriend doesn't arrest me. Leo groaned. That was before I knew you'd brought a 40 in here, Rolf. Seed Mother, I assumed you had a little 12-ounce bottle or something. I know you're college age, but still. Rolf held up the bottle. This? This won't even do anything to me. Fanina, the three of us tested our limits a couple months ago. A bottle like this is nothing. Rolf! Naomi and Moira cried out in unison. Oh, to be young and stupid again. He, Melissa, and Tolson had all gone through that phase, and he remembered the consequences well. Folding her arms and glaring daggers, Moira said, Slap the narc for me. Gladly, Naomi replied as she smacked Rolf across the shoulder, then the back of his head. Gesturing at the bottle, she said, I want half now. Half? Rolf asked, voice rising in indignation as he hugged it to his chest. You know that what's mine is yours, Chips. But why do you need half of mine when you have your own? Rolf! Naomi hissed. Her eyes nearly bugged out of her head, and she raised a hand to slap him again. Curling her fingers into a fist, she brought her hand back to her lap with effort. Then she turned dismissively to watch the players heading for their respective dugouts. I don't have a clue what you're talking about, Dip. Leo turned a raised eyebrow to Moira. She readjusted her baseball cap and gave him an innocent smile. He warned her anyway. If you open or drink anything alcoholic, Naira will smell it on your breath, and I'm not going to do a thing to protect you. Moira grinned. I like you a lot more now that you're no longer a snop. Heads up. Gesturing with his head, Leo pointed his nose at the next group of people making their way down the aisle. Naira led the pack, followed by her husband, and Leo almost had to double-take at seeing them both in casual attire. Tolson squeezed in behind them, towing the lovely Noelle by the hand. Past them, Sergei helped a crutch-wielding Tigra up the last step to the aisle. Knowing Tigra was coming, Leo had intentionally booked tickets close to the front to minimize stair use. Thanks to all the physical therapy, Tigra could walk short distances, as long as he took breaks when he needed them. Since Moira was the one giving him the treatments, Sergei had volunteered to help out in his own way. The two giants had since become fast friends. Their laughter drowned out all nearby conversation as their combined attempt to get Tigra seated nearly sent Sergei toppling into the next aisle. The last time the entire group had all been in the same place at the same time was in this very stadium. How fitting that this was where they all came back together. "Your mother coming?" Leo asked Moira. "I bought enough seats for her and at least Marston to sit with us." Popping a breath mint, Moira shrugged. "You think Marston's going to let her sit down here among the commoners?" "You really think that's going to stop your mother?" Naomi asked. Moira grinned. "Not the slightest. She forced him to arm wrestle her recently, under threat of firing him if he refused to participate. Turns out, as long as she's got Prism, she kicks his rump consistently and soundly. It's kind of solidified for him that more than ever before, she does what she wants and will be fine." Having worked for her for 6 months now, Leo had to agree with that assessment. "She does what she wants and will be fine" was Renetta Dolahan to a T. It wasn't the only reason to like and respect her, but it was certainly the most attention-grabbing reason. Music blared through the stadium as people began to gather on the field. For the stadium's first game since the massacre a year ago, I was little surprised that it was packed. Spotting empty seats among the crowd was about like trying to spot a missing thread on a shirt. You could know it was there, and your eye would still gloss over it at least 3 times. "They're coming out to play!" Rolf said, excitedly getting to his feet as the players on both teams left their dugouts behind and swarmed out onto the field for opening ceremonies. Naomi and Moira leapt to their feet a moment later. The people in the row behind them scowled as the tall Nolfs blocked their view. But that was their own problem. Let the kits enjoy their moment. That said, Moira herself suffered from the same problem when the people ahead of them stood up. She spent several seconds trying to peer between gaps in arms, then turned to scowl at Leo. "In the trenches for the true experience, you said. At least in the box seats I can see the field. Down here I can't see Dross." Rolf held his half-trained 40 out to Naomi. "Be a dear and hold this for me, Chips." "I cannot be a deer. I can only be a Nulf. But I will hold it if you let me drink some." "Go for it," Rolf said, grinning as she practically ripped the bottle from his hands. Then he held his arms out to Moira. "Come here, short stuff. I'll give you a boost." For as much as Moira liked to go on the warpath against anyone who so much as thought about pointing out her height, her friends seemed to have earned a free pass. Her look of annoyance turned to an excited grin as she took Rolf up on his offer. Moira was small, but she wasn't that small, and Leo had to step in with a balancing hand to keep the pair from falling over. Eventually, though, Moira was seated on Rolf's shoulders, and all 3 kits let out a cheer as the stadium roared to life. A smile tugged at Leo's lips as he watched them. Nolf and Sneppert alike, enjoying life together and helping each other without a second thought. They were living reminders that everything had been worth it. Things were far from perfect, but life was getting better. Five. 4 years after the breach. Naira left the Department of Motor Vehicles with a spring in her step and a slip of paper in her hand. No more temporary permission to operate vehicles from a yearly pass signed by the Prime Minister. She held it up to the sun, letting the light poke through the paper. The photo of her wasn't particularly attractive, but it wasn't bad for being a few years shy of turning 50. Besides, the photographer had rejected 3 other photos for showing too much teeth. The photographer didn't understand. How could Naira not smile at finally receiving a driver's license? Her other hand was entwined with Elaine's, and she gave it a squeeze. He returned it with a firmness that defied his age. Though more of his fur had gone silver now, he was as physically fit as he'd ever been. Maybe even more so. Meanwhile, Naira had to deny her own cravings just to avoid going up a size. It wasn't fair. Leo was waiting for them at his car. The ring on his finger glinted in the sunlight as he played with his keys. Seeing them approach, he pushed to a standing position and grinned. Whose came out worse? Naira's, for sure, Elaine said, slowing his stride and giving her a wink. Excuse you, she said, rolling her eyes. I swear, that photographer didn't like me. Leo chuckled. It's the DMV. The photographers don't like anybody. No, Naira insisted. She liked Elaine just fine. You're just jealous because she complimented the silver in my fur. Maybe if you stopped dyeing out your own greys with black, you'd get more compliments too. I'm quite happy with the way I look, with or without the compliments of a grumpy photographer to validate my appearance. What about the compliments of a very proud husband? Proud? That I accomplished the same thing you did because the higher-ups finally saw fit to treat us closer to equals? Elaine shook his head, pointing at Naira as he turned to Leo. You see how hard she is to please? Something to consider before you walk down the aisle yourself. Leo grinned. Somehow, I think mine might be even worse in that regard. Shaking his head again, Elaine muttered. Women. They're the best, but they'll drive you absolutely bonkers trying to keep them happy. Naira scoffed. Should I start listing off all of the frustrations that follow in the wake of males? Is that the kind of discussion you really want to start with me? Because I will destroy you both so thoroughly they'd have to collect what's left of you with an electrum vacuum. With a defensive lifting of his hands, Elaine laughed. That's a war I know I'll lose, Starlight. Good. Now on the subject of things that make women happy, I'll take the keys. Raising an eyebrow, Leo tossed them her way. Yes, ma'am. It seemed Melissa was training him rather well. Surprise! Moira yelled, popping out from behind the sofa. A large banner hung from the ceiling, suspended by a set of flowering vines that smelled heavenly. Congratulations was spelled correctly this time. Beneath that, Moira had used the vines themselves to write Professor Naira. Elaine and Leo started clapping and cheering from the porch. No wonder they'd made Naira open the door. Of course they were in on it. As for Moira, she stood alone behind the sofa. She'd gone to the trouble of braiding her hair, something she usually only did when her mother specifically requested it. No longer did she wear the multicolored jacket of her youth. Now she favored more practical denim or leather jackets, though they usually had at least 2 colors to work with. Today's jacket was purple and black. It was hard to believe this was the same girl who'd shown doe-eyed wonder at her first introduction to alchemancy. She was a college student now, going for the same doctorate that Naira now held. Sorry, I know one person isn't much of a surprise, Moira said with an embarrassed smile. Mother wasn't able to conclude business in Jinthis in time, so she probably won't be back to Cyphus for another week. Tigra and Sergei went with her, so they're both out. Tolson's sick with some kind of stomach bug, and Noelle's back in Dakota visiting her folks. You guys beat Melissa here, and Rolf called to say that Naomi went into labor, so they won't be making it either. Which leaves me. She threw her small arms wide with a quiet, musical ta-da that formed a trail of snowflakes in the air. She shrugged. I called Leo, and neither of us wanted to cancel, so I came over and decorated while you guys were getting your licenses done. With a big grin and eager eyes, she stepped around the couch. Speaking of your licenses, I want to see them. Naira handed hers over, and as Moira examined it, she could swear the girl was somehow even more excited about the whole thing than she was. Dinner was a lovely affair, prepared by Elaine, who used it as an opportunity to give Leo some cooking pointers. Melissa arrived with Tazael shortly before dinner, and the 6 of them had a delightful evening. A driver's license in her name, the official title of professor to finally acknowledge Naira's work on her doctorate, and her entire family gathered in her home for a warm meal and even warmer company. Naira had never before felt so blessed. That wasn't to say that the evening passed by without any heated words. Leo and Elaine often got to sit back and enjoy the fireworks as their opinionated loved ones verbally duked it out. Most impressively, it was rare for someone to stand alone. Moira and Naira might agree on one thing, just to pick apart each other's arguments on something else. What was really funny was when both Moira and Tazael agreed on something. They hated that so much that they almost started fighting just to get the other person to stop agreeing with them. The liveliness of the party faded once Tazale's curfew rolled around. Melissa went to return him and would likely head home after that. That left Naira, her husband, and 2 children that felt like her own, Leo and Moira. Cleanup turned into a whole family affair when everyone volunteered to participate. 3 years ago, Moira would have been too proud to do something everyone else was doing, especially if it involved menial labor. Similarly, 3 years ago, Leo would have been tripping over himself to help as some kind of guilt thing. Now, they both did it for a much simpler reason. They just wanted to help. How much they'd both grown. For not being related by blood, the pair certainly bantered like siblings. Despite Moira's sharpness and Leo's laid-back humor, the two never escalated the repartee far. Leo simply didn't have the energy to sustain it past a certain point. Though, he was often able to annoy Moira into dropping it early through expert use of particularly painful puns. Right now, they were doing dishes together and finding camaraderie through swapping stories about Moira's mother. Naira watched them from the kitchen door, a small smile creeping across her face. Elaine slipped up beside her. Having just shaken the tablecloth, he now held it neatly folded over one arm. The fur on his neck brushed her shoulder as he laid his muzzle alongside her own. Seed Mother told us we could only have 2, Starlight. Then she turned around and surprised us with 2 more, he whispered. Reaching up, Naira pressed their muzzles together. It was true. Almost 2 years had gone by since Leo's mother passed, and Elaine and Naira had wound up adopting him in every sense but a legal one. Naira was to be the one walking him down the aisle when the time came. Tazale wasn't thrilled to have him be part of the family, but he'd agreed not to fight it as long as it never actually became legal. As for Moira, the girl was over at their house so often for study help from Naira, they'd set up a bedroom just for her. The ears on both Sneppards twitched, and Moira hissed, "Careful, they're probably about to ask you for grandchildren." Then she piped up, "Give Leo a year, and that number will grow." Shooting her a dirty look, he flicked her with suds. "If you remind them we can hear them, they'll stop saying anything fun or incriminating around us." He turned to glance at Elaine. "By the way, Melissa bumps that count from 2 extra children to 3. "So she does," Elaine said with a smile. "I won't miscount next time." 15 minutes later, cleanup was finished, and all 4 of them gathered in the living room. Naira got a fire going, Elaine broke out the wine, and conversation fell to an appropriate evening volume. They hadn't done this for long when Elaine and Moira exchanged some kind of knowing glance. Excusing themselves, they returned a few minutes later with Elaine's violin and a selection of fresh Tarim crystals. "We have one last surprise for you," Moira said, cracking one of the crystals. "Elaine and I have something we've been practicing, and we want you to be the first to hear it." Raising an eyebrow, Naira settled into her chair, resting her wine glass in her lap. With a glance at Leo, she asked, "Are you in on this?" He threw his hands up defensively. "I knew they were doing it, but I'm sparing everyone's ears by not participating. Believe me, you'd rather have me for my ears than for my voice." "I offered to let you play an instrument," Moira teased. "You said I could pick between the triangle and the tambourine. I'm no musician, but I can tell when I'm being mocked. I'll leave the music to the people with talent." She shrugged as Elaine started tuning his instrument. Finishing off her own glass of wine, Moira did a bit of humming to warm up. Before long, they started in earnest. Elaine's private concerts had always been special for Naira, a hidden beauty of sci-fi known only to her. Adding in Moira's natural gift for song elevated it to a whole new level of beauty, shown only to Naira and those she loved. Her song activated the Tarim, producing a new, wonderful scent, one Naira would forever equate with this moment, these people, and her irreplaceable bond with them. It was the scent of healing, the scent of warmth and growth, the scent of family, her family. There were many moments vying for the coveted position of happiest day of Naira's life. The first time Naira had successfully made a frantic getaway on a hoverbike. The first private concert Elaine ever gave her. The day she told Elaine, I do. The first day she held Tazael in her arms. The first time she held Ren. The excitement written on the boys' faces after the first time they played baseball. When the 5th university she applied to actually accepted her for a teaching role. When she was reunited with Elaine and Tazael, and the Bradburn nightmare finally ended. Today was a new contender for the crown. Her right to liberty had been officially recognized by Cyphus and would be protected in the future. She'd finally been promoted to do the work she loved most at the level she wanted. And she was celebrating both victories with people who loved her and were just as happy for her as she was. Surely there was nothing further she needed. Everything she wanted was something she'd finally come to have. All that remained was to look forward to what surprises were held by the days to come. Closing her eyes, Naira focused on the music, letting it envelop her like a warm blanket and carry her into an even better tomorrow. Six. 12 years after the breach. Moira Dolahan pulled off the road. She'd caught sight of an overlook she couldn't pass up. The car bounced around her as the tires crunched over exposed roots and chunks of soil and loose stone. This vehicle had cost a small fortune, most of which was wrapped up in the rubber used to make its tires. It was a graduation gift from her mother, who served Cyphus now not as its prime minister, but as one of the leading voices in its parliament. Leo had teased her quite a bit for being gifted the car. "You're a doctor now. Shouldn't you be able to afford it yourself?" Rich doctors did medical work to save or improve lives. Poor doctors did research for the sake of furthering scientific understanding. Moira happened to do both, but only got paid for the latter. Someone needed to carry on the torch when Naira was gone. The fields of alchemy and alchemancy had exploded in the years after the breach. Naira had gotten her wish, and introductory courses in both were now being taught at the high school level. Beyond the few natives Moira had met in her lifetime, and her own mother, Moira could count on one hand the number of people she'd encountered who could hear magic the way she could. Those who could hold a tune could be taught to approximate the elemental songs, but only those who could hear the slight variations from reaction to reaction could modulate their own song enough to really utilize the advantages of singing over visualizing. That meant Moira was practically a pioneer in her field. Yes, the natives had a head start on her, but that just gave her someone to learn from. She simply had to find them first. Postcards from Genthis, Arastal, Dakota, and Kotagen slid around the dash as Moira pulled to a stop. Her year-long vacation was almost at its end. She'd managed to drum up funding for it by using it as an opportunity to interact with academics in the other bulbs to study what they'd learned about the planet's magic. Unfortunately, Cyphus had wound up being the most advanced of the bulbs in that regard. Not to say that there had been nothing of value to take from the other bulbs, just that there hadn't been as much as she'd hoped. Now there was only one bulb left to visit. Moira powered down the car. When she started this trip, she could only drive with the window down for an hour a day. After a year of traveling across Fanatom, her tolerance for its atmosphere had grown in leaps and bounds. She hadn't rolled the window up since leaving the last bulb, Kotagen. Growing accustomed to the planet's natural prism levels had spoiled her, and it carried a clean, herbal smell that she loved. Despite her best hopes, it had done nothing for her height. Apparently, that side effect only occurred in people who were exposed to continuous prism while their bodies were still growing. There were plenty of studies back among the newest generation of Cyphus children to evidence this. Her opportunity had come and passed. But so what? She was one of the best, if not the best Alchemancer found in any of the bulbs. Who needed height when you were able to cast elemental magic with a handful of dirt or water and your mind, like the wizards from comic books? Moira stretched as she got out of the car. She'd been driving for almost 3 hours without a break. She'd picked a good spot to stop, though. The view took her breath away. A short walk brought her to the edge of a rocky precipice, overlooking the vibrant, lush jungle. And in the distance, an enormous glass dome so concealed by overgrowth it looked like the very trees were trying to eat it up. Fanina, original home of the Nulfs, first seed to be breached, last known location of the devil herself. Moira wanted answers, and if she was going to find them anywhere, it would be in that bulb. Could she delve into the very pit of death and destruction? The place that all the other bulbs assumed to be a living representation of the torturous half of the afterlife? A place reported to be crawling with monsters and run by the devil? She'd seen the picture. Anima wasn't a devil. She was a person. An alien, to be sure, but still a person. One with a scientific leaning, too, if the term technician was being translated correctly by the computer. Like Siphus, Fanina was a seed some 20 miles across, so finding a single person who'd been missing for centuries in the ruins of an entire city, that was taking needle in a haystack to an absurd level. If the hay was also hiding giant monsters that would be all too happy to eat you if you didn't distract them with Tarum. Moira smiled. Tarum ran through her veins. So did the other elements, if her theory was correct, though consistently isolating them in useful ways was proving difficult. Regardless, she was born for this. "Hope you're ready, Fanina," Moira called, pointing at the distant bulb with a defiant finger. "Your secrets can't hide from Dr. Moira Dolahan, Fanatom's greatest Alchemancer." The end. Postscript. 4 years ago, I set out with a crazy idea. I, Todd, was going to write a novel. I've had a creative itch for as long as I can remember, and for most of my life, that's found an outlet in writing. Prior to this, I'd written dozens of short stories, but never anything longer than maybe 10,000 words. At the strong encouragement of friends who have been subjected to these short stories, I started into the very daunting prospect of writing something that would be long enough to qualify as a novel. Naive Todd from 2021 assumed he would struggle to write enough words to surpass a novella. Well, at over 360,000 words, Alchemancer blew that idea right out of the water. What started as a personal challenge quickly turned into a labor of love. I'm very much a discovery writer, so barely formed outlines and happy accidents are the name of the game. The happiest accident of all? Moira Dolahan, my precious little Alchemancer. Naira was always intended as the primary protagonist of this story. Leo was always intended as a detective hot on her heels, and those were the only two characters I started with. Moira came much later, as I was playing with other perspectives to tell the story from. The moment I met her, I knew two things. First, she had to ascend to the same level of narrative time as the other two protagonists, and second, she had to become Naira's sidekick. There's a lot of heroes in this story, but Moira is still probably the one I find most inspiring. As any creative person knows, there's any number of obstacles that can rear their ugly heads and try to stop you from drawing the next line or writing the next page. Writing Alchemancer was not without its periods of burnout. However, I have two very specific things that carried me through those times and gave me the energy needed to keep going. First, I enlisted the help of the insanely talented character concept artist Pasa Grossa at a very early stage in the book's development. I pitched the setting and my ideas for the three protagonists, and Pasa brought them to life in a way that surpassed all my expectations. Pasa's art style reminds me of the kinds of illustrations I used to see in children's stories growing up, and it gives such a unique flavor to Naira, Leo, and Moira, to say nothing of how much individuality they imbued each character with. Anytime I was going through a creative funk, looking back at the concept art would fill me with such palpable drive to write in that character's voice that my mood would flip on its head and I wouldn't be able to get to my keyboard fast enough. Seriously, these pictures helped me dozens of times. So thank you, Pasa. Second, despite not being particularly published as an author, I already have a small but dedicated fan base. Many of these checked in a couple times a month to ask about how the novel was progressing. Those constant little pokes and prods were a jolt of caffeine every time I grew creatively lethargic. You didn't give up on me, and that kept me from giving up on myself. Lastly, whoever you are, thank you for taking a chance on my book. I hope you had as much fun spending time with these characters as I did while telling their story. Until we meet again, or, as Naira would say, thank you for your time. Todd.